When you think about huge, world-changing events, you probably picture massive battles, right? Or some king signing a big declaration. But sometimes it's not like that at all. Sometimes it all starts with just one person, one idea, one single action. And today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of how one monk, with just one document, completely and kind of accidentally set the entire world on fire.
All right, so let's set the scene. The date is October 31st, 1517. It's a Wednesday in a small German town, and honestly, it should have been a totally forgettable day. Just another day. I want you to picture it. You're in this quiet little town, Wittenberg, deep in rural Germany. The air is crisp. The leaves are turning. The harvest was good. There's this feeling of peace in the air. Those terrible memories of the plague are finally starting to fade. For the 2,000 or so folks living here, life is about as good as it's been in a long, long time. But today, the streets aren't so quiet. They're buzzing. The town is packed with visitors, pilgrims streaming in from all over the place. So what's the big deal? Well, the next day, November 1st, is All Saints' Day. It's one of the biggest holidays of the year, and here in Wittenberg, that means something really special is about to go down. But through all that hustle and bustle, there's this one guy, right? He's moving with this quiet purpose. He's a monk, about 33 years old, and super thin, almost skeletal, really. His name? Martin Luther. And he's holding this big, rolled-up piece of paper. He has no idea, but what he's about to do, well, it's going to echo for centuries. So, to really get why this moment is about to be so explosive, we have to try and get inside the head of someone living back in 1517. For them, pretty much everything in life circled back to one single terrifying question: what happens after you die? And for most people, the answer was not great. It was terrifying. The belief was that even if your sins were forgiven by Christ for all eternity, you still had to pay something called a temporal punishment. And that meant a stopover in purgatory, a place of intense, fiery suffering to purify your soul. Now, it wasn't hell, but it was a place everybody was desperate to avoid, or at the very least, spend as little time there as possible. Now, the church had a system for dealing with this. It was called the Sacrament of Penance. It was a three-step process. First, you had to feel truly sorry for your sin. That's contrition. Second, you had to confess it to a priest. And then the third part, and this is the key, satisfaction. You actually had to do something, good works, go on a pilgrimage, give to charity, to balance the scales for the sin you committed. But let's be real, what if you're busy? What if you can't just pack up and go on a pilgrimage for a year? Well, the church had a convenient solution for that. For a price, you could buy an indulgence. Think of it like a spiritual get-out-of-jail-free card. It was an official church document that took care of that whole satisfaction part for you, promising to knock some time off your sentence or a loved one's sentence in the fires of purgatory. And you guessed it, that convenient little shortcut, it blew up into a massive industry. This is where theology gets messy and starts to look a whole lot like big business and politics, with some very powerful people competing for your salvation dollars. So you've basically got two big players competing in this market. On one side, you have Frederick the Wise. He's Luther's local ruler. He's kind of the old-school established guy. He sold indulgences, but only one day a year on All Saints' Day, and he used the money for things like public works. But then you've got the new guy on the block, a young, super ambitious prince named Albert of Brandenburg. He looked at this and saw a huge, untapped business opportunity. He was going to sell indulgences on a whole other level. So Albert comes up with this, let's call it a very creative business plan. He wants to buy his way into the powerful position of Archbishop of Mainz, which would make him an elector of the Holy Roman Empire. A huge deal. The problem? It costs a fortune. 10,000 gold ducats, and he is flat broke. So what does he do? He goes to the Fugger Bank and takes out a massive loan. Then, to pay it all back, he cuts a deal with the Pope to sell these special new indulgences. The whole thing was a pure business transaction. Half the money he makes goes straight to the bank to pay off his personal debt, and the other half goes to the Pope in Rome to fund the ridiculously expensive construction of St. Peter's Basilica. Okay, so to pull off this massive sales campaign, Albert needed a marketing genius, a real shark. And he found the perfect guy, a Dominican friar named John Tetzel, a man who was, let's just say, notoriously effective and had absolutely no problem with his aggressive sales tactics. Tetzel would roll into town with what has to be one of the most manipulative and, frankly, brilliant marketing jingles in all of history. It went something like this. As soon as coin the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. I mean, wow. He was literally preying on people's deepest fears and their love for their dead relatives. He turned salvation into a cheap commercial transaction. And you know what? It was working like a charm. And this whole situation brings us right back to our skinny monk, Martin Luther, walking through the streets of Wittenberg. He's been watching all of this unfold, and his conscience is absolutely screaming at him. Now, it is so important to understand what Luther was actually trying to do here, because it's probably not what you think. He wasn't trying to burn the church to the ground. He was a deeply faithful priest and professor. He saw people from his own church, his own flock, running off to buy Albert's indulgences, thinking they could just purchase a ticket to heaven. So he did what professors do. He wrote up a list of 95 points for a debate. He wrote them in Latin, the language of scholars, and he tacked them to the church door, which was basically the university's community bulletin board. He wanted to start a conversation, a debate among academics, not a revolution. But then, something happens that Luther totally didn't see coming. Somebody gets a hold of his Latin theses, translates them into everyday German, and takes them to a printer. And this, right here, is where a brand new piece of tech changes everything. Because of the printing press, which was still pretty new at the time, what was supposed to be a sleepy academic debate just went viral, like 16th century viral. Within a few weeks, it's the talk of all of Germany. Luther had absolutely hit a nerve. Luther had absolutely no idea what he had just done. He thought he was just a loyal son of the church pointing out a problem that needed fixing. He had no clue he was about to ring a bell that could never, ever be unrung. The historian Roland Bainton described it with this just perfect metaphor. He said Luther was like a man climbing a winding staircase inside a dark cathedral. He reaches out his hand in the blackness, just trying to steady himself, and his hand grabs a rope. And all of a sudden, he's shocked to hear the deafening clang of a massive bell. A bell he never meant to ring, but one that was now echoing across the entire continent. That bell was the start of the Protestant Reformation, an earthquake that would shatter the unity of Western Europe and totally reshape the world we live in today. All of it from one man, one document, and one mallet. It just makes you wonder, doesn't it? How powerful can one idea be when the world, without even realizing it, is just waiting to hear it?